Sonia Levy. I'm an artist, a filmmaker. I've been working with ocean and ecology for years, and I'm particularly interested in thinking through the ways watery space have been transformed by extractive and expansion logics and politics. And this is what I look at in my work through quite detailed site-based inquiry. And I've worked with coral restoration projects in the past, also with ideas around canalization of waterways, linearization, and also more recently on the lagoon in Venice.
Ifor Duncan, I'm a researcher, writer, but also starting a moving image practice around submerged spaces. I teach at Goldsmiths, visual cultures, and research architecture, and mostly my work looks at both human and multi-species implications of political violence in relationship to water bodies. And you'll see some clips from a video I made in Italy. The surface bubbles, they are breathing in the deep. One diver says he feels high when he returns. He'd been filming the wreck 30 meters below.
Yeah.
Bearing to the surface and body pressure, they return with depth, bringing its image to the surface to surround us.
Oceanic spaces and practices of submergence have recently been explored in the arts and humanities for their potential to assemble counter-politics and gather historicity otherwise. So Ifor and I are both engaged in such inquiries in our practices. However, we argue that submergence does not inherently question authoritative narratives, and it might conceivably, as we attempt to demonstrate here, reinforce them.
Here we turn our attention to Leni Riefenstahl's final 2002 work, Impressions of the Deep, attempting to demonstrate how image-making practices and the image world they produce encounter sets of colonial and extractive politics. We thereby call for further engagement in the intricacies of what sometimes lies obfuscated in image-making, calling attention to the kinds of worlds promoted through such practices and representations, even sometimes through negligence. Such an approach, we argue, has ethical, political consequences.
Oligotrophic waters are characterized by low nutrient levels, typically resulting in clarity and transparency due to minimal suspended particulate matter. Underwater filmmakers seek out these conditions because they provide good visibility. By contrast, turbidity is a measure of opaqueness in water quality, reflecting the amount of suspended particulate matter that affect transparency. While oligotrophic conditions allow for aesthetically pleasing, clear images, turbid waters present a different reality, often obscuring visibility and highlighting more complex, less idealized aspects of underwater environments. Turbidity levels result from complex interactions of factors. One significant contributor is plankton growth, driven by nutrient inputs. In a healthy ocean, this is typically facilitated by upwelling currents that bring nutrient-rich waters from deeper and colder ocean layers to surface waters. In these circumstances, turbidity is a visual cue of life-giving microalgae suspended in the water column, ocean's primary producers, supporting myriad ways of living and dying.
In the vast, unproductive low and mid-altitude ocean, warm and sunlit surface water is separated from cold, nutrient-rich interior water by a strong density difference that restricts mixing of water and thereby reduces nutrients, which becomes the limiting factor for productivity.
This temperature-driven dynamic characterizes waters in tropical regions, such as coral reef environments, where they tend to be oligotrophic, marked by transparency and low productivity.
The paradox with coral reefs is that, although they are highly diverse ecosystems, contain an abundance of organic material, and are highly productive, they exist in essentially oligotrophic environments. The analogy is often drawn to tropical rainforests, which are also extremely diverse and exist in nutrient-poor conditions. The key to the existence of coral reefs rests in the rapid recycling of nutrients between all components of the community. This balance is disturbed, for example, by the addition of nutrients in excess from an outside source. The ecosystem frequently declines.
These nutrients in excess or areas of high productivity and their elevated turbidity have become characteristic of our times. These conditions are largely due to, but not limited to, fertilizer runoff or raw sewage discharge, which, with the added influence of rising temperatures, leading to a dangerous phenomenon known as eutrophication.
Eutrophication is an emblematic example of how capitalist processes seep into the world's metabolism. When waters are flooded with nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, they can lead to rapid growth in aquatic plants and communities of microalgae, giving waters a vivid green hue. Such bursts of growth can choke off light, deplete oxygen, and alter pH levels. These processes alter the dynamics of aquatic ecosystems, triggering harmful algal blooms.
The prevalence of highly turbid environments and perilous eutrophic conditions draws attention to aquatic environments as repositories for the surplus and waste generated by capitalist accumulation, showing how such processes are now constitutive of the seas and how histories are forging ecologies.
So, our dear friend Bridget Crone conceived turbidity as a watery and optical term, quote, from her, quote, to articulate the specific practice of fieldworking with a camera as a practice of immersion as much as picturing. Describing a particular quality of water, turbidity measures the relative density of particles, often pollutants, suspended, but it also offers a way of describing experience that is itself tumultuous and perhaps obscuring of clear visual perception. Thus, turbidity offers a means to think about images and image making in a way that extends beyond the visual to the sensory, provides a way to recognize the double nature of fieldwork, camera, as an embodied experience, and the representation or measure of that experience.
In this wider project, we consider the role of the camera or of an image as a mode of intervention into a spectrum of the turbid, of navigating from oligotrophic to eutrophic environments, and how the search for a specific image within the spectrum, from transparency to opacity, operates as political modes of image making.
In Fascinating Fascism, Susan Sontag provides a withering description of Riefenstahl's 1974 photodocumentary of The Last of the Nuba, a work of violent ethnographic objectification. As she describes it as reflecting continuity of fascist aesthetics back to Riefenstahl's 1930s. Here we are interested in how the image produced in Impressions of the Deep, which you can see here, says more about Riefenstahl's image practice than the reality of submerged conditions. We wish to propose that submerging into Riefenstahl is a continuation of her fascist aesthetics. It pursues a fascination with idealized form and a containment of life as expressed through the transparency of her imagery, where the production of a clear submerged image is itself a desire for the mastery of water.
As Riefenstahl spelled out in an interview she gave in Cahiers du Cinéma in 1965, quote, "I can simply say that I feel spontaneously attracted by everything that is beautiful. Yes, beauty, harmony, and perhaps this care for composition, this aspiration to form is in effect something very German. I am fascinated by what is beautiful, strong, healthy, what is living," unquote. Indeed, in the search for a perfect composition of the coral reef and the life forms found there, she seeks an unreality that bears the traces of fascist beauty, and its often disturbing glorification of physical health, rather than the ecological reality of acidification and turbidity.
At one point in the documentary, The Wonderful, Horrible Life of Leni Riefenstahl, she complains that the current is too strong and the underwater visibility is not good enough, and there is too much plankton. Considering Impressions of the Deep is intended to align with her environmentalism, she was herself Greenpeace ambassador. Her frustration at the lack of clarity reflects a clear misunderstanding of what a healthy submerged environment might look like, and indeed what life forms might be found there. All of this is secondary to the impression of a healthy, living, strong environment that she seeks to capture, but is itself an idealized condition and an erroneous perspective.
As G.M. Tyree argues, quote, "Riefenstahl's self-mythology involved the conception of herself as a finder of difficult-to-access pure sites of vanishing beauty. I like to search for rare things, she once explained, but her unwillingness to show what she considers not pure, not clean, and not beautiful, precisely what makes Riefenstahl work fascist, end quote.
Rather than, quote, being underwater far from the public gaze where she is happiest, as the voiceover of her biographic documentary suggests, she cannot escape the long shadows cast by her past. These shadows exist in image form, even in submerged spaces.
Riefenstahl's pursuit of transparency for capturing her aquatic subjects sanitize aquatic world, severing them from the histories contained within water's materiality. We propose that this removal of oceanic conditions, this search for an image detached from context, mirrors her practice of apolitical cinematic forms. Indeed, we see impressions of the deep as more than just a minor natural history documentary focused on underwater worlds. We see it as a continuing manifestation of Riefenstahl's visual practice of denial and deflection. It represents her persistent attempts at an aesthetic of obfuscation, symptomatic of her cinematic practice that claims to narrate world as detached from politics.
Again, in Fascinating Fascism, Sontag noted, quote, Riefenstahl frequently defended her work on grounds of artistic merit. She argued that her films should be judged based on their technical and aesthetic qualities rather than their political content, end quote. We can easily interpret her act of submersion as an effort to wash away her historical associations and involvement in Nazi propaganda. Yet we wish to propose a further interpretation. In Riefenstahl's portrayal of underwater worlds, the search for technical and aesthetic qualities that she asserts are apolitical is itself a continuation of her fascist aesthetics. Her political ideology manifests in the depiction of her subjects, emphasizing transparency and beauty of form, aesthetic purity over contextual specificity, forming a timeless and placeless idealized vision.
Vision is always a question of the power to see, and perhaps of the violence implicit in our visualizing practices. With whose blood were my eyes crafted? In her 1988 essay, Situated Knowledges, Donna Haraway emphasizes the importance of situatedness and accountability in scientific knowledge making, cautioning against the danger of an all-encompassing God's eye view, claiming itself as neutral and objective. Haraway argued that this perspective often conceals a specific position, asserting itself as universal while erasing its own semiotic material conditions. Prompted by Haraway, we examine Riefenstahl's submerged stance through the lens of feminist ethics. We consider her image-making as attempting to erase her own semiotic material conditions, but also in a double bind that erases those of the underwater worlds she portrays. This abstraction transformed vibrant underwater world into a series of aesthetically pleasing, yet decontextualized images, each shot of colorful marine life standing independent from its broader context. Riefenstahl celebrates the formal purity of coral reefs and associated fauna, instead of calling attention to the socio-ecological specificity of the places she encounters. To challenge such an approach, we wish to provide here context facts for the film's locations. Predominantly filmed in Papua New Guinea, with footage also from the Maldives Islands, Seychelles, Kenya, Tanzania, Indonesia, the Red Sea, Cocos Island in the Pacific, and the Caribbean Sea in Cuba.
By presenting these environments without historical framing, Riefenstahl fosters a romanticized view that portrays nature as timeless and disconnected from socio-environmental realities. By erasing or overlooking these conditions, her work perpetuates dangerous ideological narratives. In a 2002 interview in The Guardian for the release of Impressions of the Deep, she declares, quote, I seek harmony, and underwater I have eventually found it, end quote. Is the harmony Riefenstahl alludes to reminiscent of Nazi ideology where the sea is mythologized as a source of energy for German workers to recuperate and rejuvenate their strength?
As Sontag further suggests, quote, fascist aesthetic is based on the containment of vital forces. Movements are confined. held tight, held in, unquote. The submerged image Riefenstahl seek is contained in a way that sits in line with the containment of water itself. Clarity and transparency are thought not only in a fascist vision, but in a capitalist and colonialist productions of water. In Poetics of Relation, Edouard Glissant opens his engagement with questions of transparency and opacity by discussing the relation between the abstraction that colonial epistemologies try to uphold and the knowledges that always exceed this simplification.
I read the quote from Glissant. There still exist centres of domination, but it is generally acknowledged that there are no exclusive, lofty realms of learning or metropolises of knowledge left standing. Henceforward, this knowledge, composed of abstract generality and linked to the spirit of conquest and discovery, has the presence of human cultures and their solid materiality superimposed upon it. And knowledge, or at least the epistemology we produce for ourselves from it, has been changed by this. Its transparency, in fact, its legitimacy is no longer based on the right. Transparency no longer seems at the bottom of the mirror in which Western humanity reflected the world in its own image. There is opacity now, a whole alluvium deposited by populations, silt that is fertile but, in actual fact, indistinct and unexplored even today, denied or insulted more often than not, and with an insistent presence that we are incapable of not experiencing. End quote. Engaging with the legacies of transatlantic slavery in the 20th century independence of the islands of the Antilles, I have always read this passage of Glissant's alluvial poetics as describing a submerged space, where the mirror itself lies at the bottom of a river or the sea.
Ifor Duncan, in her scuba trips, including in the Caribbean Sea of Cuba, tries to retain an essentializing desire for transparency and clarity, it is a reproduction of the denial of the conditions, politics, socialities, and histories that exist in the spaces both above and below surface. We have been thinking about how our own practices might attend to the turbid histories of submergence. We have been conceiving of ways to follow the transition of extractive, bordering, and chemical politic as they exceed surfaces and move beyond different realms, carried to different bodies in ever-expanding ways.
So to conclude, we continue to ask, how can image making follow such presences and attempt to remain with the deposited alluvium of histories in a way that reads against transparent or opaque binaries, a practice that reads the dense and interlapping layers of politics that course through submerged spaces, historically, in the present, and into the future.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you.